Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen, Clavio, Scott, Caulfield joining you. It is the first day of winter. Scott, happy winter. December 21st, shortest day of the year. What are you doing to celebrate?
Getting up late and podcasting. So I'm using 20% of my sunlight to podcast with you great folks. That's it. We're gonna make some cookies for a cookie exchange. Or what else? I'm gonna try. I want to redo my pantry, so that's gonna be start planning that, and then that's on the to-do list today.
You have one of those pantries like the wine, like glass enclosed wine things where you got to you have a ladder that you climb up to.
That would be awesome. I'm a little handy, so I'm gonna try and do this all myself. But I've seen some Instagram. All you have to do is say get to your phone, be pantry remodel, and then it's just now I just get stuff on my Instagram. But I've seen one the countertop in there with the backlighting, so I'm debating doing that. Although letting you guys behind the veil, I had the moment today where this is happening more and more, and hopefully you can appreciate. I went back to our pantry today to get something. It's like, uh-oh. My wife's like, what's wrong? I'm like, I forgot what I came here for. It's just, I thought it was important. And then I go back and it's I ended up remembering. It's I wanted to grab some of that. And it's just I had that, she's like, what's wrong? I'm like, nope. I had the moment where I've completely forgot why I'm in here.
Yeah, it comes for all of us eventually, Scott. This is where you really need to use reminders. Normally I set a reminder for the next day or
reminders making an omelet. Don't forget to put eggs in there.
No, it's true. Yeah. Reminder, start toast in 2 minutes. It does. You've got this problem, right? Because you're decanting, 15-year-old, 20-year-old bottles of Bordeaux, and you can't afford to. You got to go in 38 minutes. It's hit optimal aeration. You got to go get it right there. So yeah, Scott's got a lot of problems, folks.
Optimal aeration. That's a good name for a band or a podcast. There's probably they don't have a good wine podcast out there coming soon to the Back Home Network.
Optimal aeration.
Optimal aeration.
Brought to you by Homefield. But we are
the aeration.
There you go. See, recite the varietals. I think is actually what you're going for.
That's a good one. My other old man moment. We'll just start off with old man corner with Scott here. I got a really nice quarter zip at the Pacers game a couple nights ago, and I come home and my wife's like, "Oh, quarter zips, they're coming back in." And I was like, you know what? I am now at that point with fashion and age, and I'm very happy. I'm a number on a clock, or I'm the 4. I'm into what I'm into, and fashion's going to come around, and I'll be out of fashion, and then I'll be in fashion, and then I'll be out. Cause I'm that's great. I'm happy everyone else is into quarter zips. I'm into quarter zips. I will be into quarter zips, and I'll be back into them again. I'll be right twice a day with quarter zips or hoodies or whatever I'm wearing.
Speaking of quarter zips, you know who's got some great quarter zips? Homefield Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions.
But it's so true.
Coolest designs. This caught the eye of a lot of people. If you didn't see the Indiana Rose Bowl drop yet, the Indiana Hoosiers 2026 Rose Bowl quarter zip commemorating Indiana's historic return visit to Southern California for the Rose Bowl game. As we know, they're now taking on Alabama. This one of many amazing designs that they dropped in the immediate aftermath of us deciding or figuring out where Indiana was going and now who they're playing. Some new T-shirts featuring the 2 helmets, which look suspiciously similar to one another because of the colors involved. Both teams crimson. And then, of course, you've got the Rose Bowl bomber jacket. You've got the corduroy hat. You've got some Indiana-specific Rose Bowl game merch, all of that available on Homefield Apparel. Great holiday gift ideas, and some of this could be available, maybe not for Christmas, but on its way and arriving prior to leaving for Pasadena. So use the code HOME23. Get 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. Your home
shirt that I'm wearing to the game. Well, underneath my jersey is the one right there, the granddaddy of them all with the bison. I bought that. My wife wanted to meet me in Pasadena. Buffalo. It's funny. She came home from work. She's like, me and my friends were looking at the Homefield shirt. I'm like, Dad, because I already bought it. I already bought. Wow. And it's like, no, I was trying to decide. I'm like, great, because I bought one for you. I bought one for our kids. I bought one for me. It's such good stuff. And I mean, this is really true. It's not just because they sponsor us. There comes a point every year where I'm like, I got to stop. I just need to stop. I have too many clothes, too many hoodies. I cannot do it. And this was literally one where they dropped it. And I'm like, I have to, I can't not have one of these. It really is true.
It's really disgusting behavior by Homefield. No, I'm kidding. Just great stuff.
Well, I also know, like there's going to be a Peach Bowl set, or there's going to be a.
I know, that's what I mean. They hit you right here every single time. It's absolute market exploitation, and I'm here for it.
Yes.
But Homefield and their designers doing a great job of coming up with some awesome designs that you will be able to wear and remember, not just at the game, but into the future as we reflect back on this very special season for IU football. And of course, we're also, going back to hitting you right here, I was wearing all of the stuff that I ordered in connection with the Big Ten championship game.
Yes.
From Homefield. So they have had so many new drops and so many things you're going to get your hands on. So homefieldapparel.com, get on their mailing list, get on their text threads. They can alert you right when the stuff that you're interested in is dropping and available for purchase. All right, Scott. So Friday night, we found out who Indiana was going to play in.
Actually, hold on. Can we start? I'm going to add an extra segment, something I think we've talked about yet, because we'll get to Friday night. We'll get to the CFP.
Okay.
Can we talk about the 60 Minutes piece about Indiana?
Sure.
Because that came out before.
We can, yes.
No, I had a couple things about that I wanted to talk to you about.
Go ahead.
One, so first off, if you haven't watched the overtime piece, there's an overtime online. I urge everyone to go and watch that. It's awesome because they had a piece with Aiden Fisher that he got cut from the initial program, but they keep talking about chip on the shoulder, and Aiden Fisher has this line that just like, it makes me want to run through a brick wall. I'm ready, where he's just like, yeah, we have a chip on our shoulder. And basically, we looked ahead, and every team that we're playing from here on out, like, they didn't recruit me. Like, none of them recruited me, which I was also like, well, you could play JMU. There's a world where you could play JMU and you did play for them. But he's like, they didn't recruit anybody on this team. And we know that. And when we walk on the field, we know they don't want us. They don't like us. And they think they're better than us. I'm like, oh, God, I love this team. So I saw that. Curious, I have one other high-level thought on that piece. So I was curious if anything else stood out from you, 60 Minutes piece.
We're at a funny point where there have been so many stories done on Indiana football that they lose their individuality. It's because you've had a CNN piece and you've had this piece, and then NBC did pieces last year and this year, and so nothing stuck out in as much as I felt like I obviously heard all of that before. The thing that sticks out to me, though, is 60 Minutes just has this huge audience of people that don't watch a lot of the sports-specific programming. This is a little bit between this and the Heisman Trophy. This is Indiana's fist shattering the glass ceiling of pop culture.
Was this the end of Breakfast Club? Or we
something like that? Yes, exactly. Yeah, but the thing that stuck out to me, I mean, more than anything else, it's the same messaging. And even the Aiden Fisher stuff in the overtime, which I agree was excellent, and I'm glad I got a chance to watch it. But it takes the Indiana story, which everybody in the Indiana fan base is very familiar with by this point. Everybody in college football is very familiar with, but puts it into a program that your mom watches, or your grandma watches. This is, it's like back in the old days, you knew someone in the sports world had broken through if your mom who doesn't watch a lot of sports, or your uncle who's not into sports at all is like, what do you think about this? Tom Brady was always the key here, where people who had no idea what was going on with football.
Or like the LeBron decision. Like, everyone had a take on that.
So this is Indiana football essentially punching up into that realm. And look, it was a great advertisement for the program and where things were at, but it's also a great advertisement for the university because it gets the branding out there. And it was a positive story. Sam Rumpsa, one of our longtime friends and occasional contributors to Crimson Cast, had a great tweet, which I agreed with, where it's like, if you told me 3 years ago that Indiana was going to be featured on 60 Minutes, I would have been terrified. Because
oh my God, are we bringing back the night stuff? Like, well, that's a great call.
Yeah. So the fact that Indiana is featured in a 9-minute segment on a nationally known news program that does stories on everything under the sun, and Indiana football is considered salient enough in the news realm that you get that much time with that exposure, and it's all positive. That's what I took away from it more than anything else. It's even though the story there wasn't a lot new there, it was a new audience, and that is why you engage in college athletics from a university perspective. It's to have the moments where you break through and are able to get your branding out there in a positive way to hundreds of thousands, millions of people who might not have been thinking about it otherwise.
It's such a great segue into my last thought of this, because you've done more TV than I have, but I've done some of these interview things. But it's like, to your point on 60 Minutes, it really is like it overshadows all of this. It's not just sports; it's something your mom would watch. You know you're going to be taped. You know it's a big audience, and there's like they're there taping. The thing that I came away with is like, damn, John Mellencamp loves to smoke. Because you're at a game, you're at a football game where you really not should be smoking. You have 60 Minutes there with a camera, like, hey, we're going to do some B-roll shots, just you kind of sitting there watching the game. It's like, cool. I'm going to fire up a heater while you're doing that.
Yes. Look, as a former smoker myself, I smoked for 12 years. I haven't smoked for 15 years. I put that part of my life behind me. But even I was able to sit through 3 hours of an IU football game and not have to continually fire up heaters. And the fact that he's got a shed up on top of,
it's great.
I didn't know that was there. Actually, Sam Rumsa, who I mentioned earlier, was like, what, like, that's right next to the WIUX radio booth where it is now on the roof. So yeah, he's got.
I remember as a student, we used to see him next door with his kids, and he's an OG fan. Like, he's been a fan. I mean, he paid for the Mellencamp Center, so like.
For those of you who have never been up in the press box or in the luxury suites area, they used to have it organized.
To be fair, it's far enough away. You could smoke, you could do whatever you want up there. You shoot off fireworks, you're not going to hit fans because you're like so far up there.
But the way it used to work was on the 6th floor. That was where this mixture of, you'd have like the opposing team's athletic department would have one. Mellencamp had one, and it was like essentially the student radio booth that Scott's talking about, where he and I called games along with many other people, Mike Petrie and John Kaluter, Sean Bartell, that whole group from back then. It was situated, I think, in box 11, and box 12 was the opposing team's athletic director.
Memory's good.
And box 10 was the Mellencamp suite. And it was always a fascinating experience having them in the box next to us. And so it's changed now, and it changed quite a while ago, where they moved radio up to the roof. They moved apparently Mellencamp up there as well. But that was probably the biggest take home that I had, because I was like, oh, okay, I would have assumed he would have been further down, but
it's awesome. And he's a good like avatar of a longtime IU fan. That was good. No, it was, as you said, it was an awesome piece. It was cool to see us featured in 60 Minutes. And it felt, I mean, I know Wertheim's from Bloomington, so it makes sense, but it's like, it felt early in that, like, this, normally those kind of pieces happen after 5 or 6 years of kind of things happening, but it's awesome. Just all the IU taking over the media landscape is great.
Well, look, and it's a big story, and you get this sometimes with emergent teams and emergent stories in college sports. And this is, I keep coming back to this core point that this is such an unusual story, not just for us IU football fans, the long-suffering ones who have been through so many bad times, and now suddenly you see Indiana at the top of the game, not just for IU sports fans in general who never gave IU football much of a look, and now they're the successful team, but to the college football establishment. This is such a unicorn story, and we saw this in the aftermath of Indiana winning the Big Ten title. Like Matt Norlander had this quote on X about how this is arguably the greatest coaching job you've seen, at least in college sports, perhaps, well, certainly in this century, perhaps in the last 50, 75 years, because of all of the different factors that we've detailed on this show. To watch it now getting out further out into the landscape, if you're paying attention as an IU fan, it's like, wow, why are so many people paying attention? But it's because it is such an unusual story, and it won't last forever. At some point you either become the establishment, and that's the goal, is you want to be the establishment. You don't want it to be, wow, who would have thought Indiana could do any of this? You want it to be like, here's Indiana doing it again. That's where you want to get as a fan. But this is the second half of the enjoy it while it's happening story that I had last year. Last year it was enjoy this ride. It may never feel the same again. This year it's enjoy the adoration, enjoy not being hated, because if you do what Curt Cignetti wants to do and you keep this level and increase this level of effectiveness in college football, there will not be glowing stories being done all over college football about what a great story you are. You will just become resented. And ultimately, in any sport, that's what you want to be. It happened with the Colts. They went from being a great story to a team that a lot of the NFL couldn't stand because of how consistently good they were for that stretch of time from 2002 until Manning retired, and then even a little bit after that. Enjoy these is, I guess, all I'm saying to folks out there.
The other thing that I take away is I do think this will help us from a media perspective after years of kind of always being stuck on the noon BTN games. Is that my other takeaway is, what drove college basketball so much in the 80s and 90s, and what drives college sports is the coaches, because they are the consistent ones that stay there.
Right.
And, that was my other feeling from the story, is there's just not a lot of personable coaches in college football right now. Like, Kirby Smart is a great coach, but it's like he is literally casting of like, give me a vanilla coach to coach, what would the coach look like? Dan Lanning is like, we'll do that with a muscular build. Like, that's what you think a football coach is. Like, Kurt Cignetti it breaks through where it's like, who's that crazy guy who has the good team, who says stuff and is like just different? And like, Cignetti is different in that, like, he is one of those coaches that I think breaks through as being unique in a sport. And so I can see that being something where if you are, CBS or Fox, like, all right, let's put him on because we can show Cignetti. So I think it's going to continue to help IU's profile. Being good and winning helps more than any of those things, but it's a sport that is driven by coaches and their personalities.
It's a really good point. And especially when you look at the coaches that are at the top of college football this year, aren't a lot of great personalities, aren't a lot of compelling people. I mean, Ryan Day is just not compelling.
Right.
He's not awful, but he feels too serious about everything, at least in his national appearances. And I know that's not the greatest arbiter, because some of his local stuff probably is just normal, but it feels like he's constantly defending himself in public all the time.
He is, because his fan base is trying to fire him every 2 years.
The next time I see the Texas Tech coach in a public interview, the first time, Dan Lanning is compelling, but in like
a football coach kind of way,
psychotic football coach way. Like, like it's hard to relate to that guy. Like, if you're someone who has a traditionalist idea about what a college coach leader should be, that's not him. I don't know. I'm not sure where you put Lanning in this mix. But then, Kirby's kind of annoying and compelling, great coach. But like his personality isn't that compelling. Marcus Freeman doesn't really have a personality. Mike Elko doesn't really have a personality. Lane has a personality.
Lane's he's gonna make waves.
But Lane's also a very annoying figure. Like a purely millennial coach.
Yeah,
in a lot
he's
of
about
ways.
to have the same Ryan Day problem where his fan base is going to be up him real quick.
Mario Cristobal, no personality. I mean, you can kind of go down the list, and then Galen and DeBoer, who's coaching, the team with the most talent in college football. I think just off the straight up numbers. Again, we know Kalen. Kalen's an amazing coach. Kalen's not a compelling figure to listen talk, and so Cignetti does. Cignetti's got all of the old ball coach elements that you grew to appreciate in guys like Bob Knight or Mike Ditka, with what it seems like none of the negative personality traits that made those people also people you could point to and say, he's what's wrong with college sports. Like Cignetti
but he also has what those guys had, which was they were great sound bites, and they were they were, I mean, as much as I hate to always bring it back to Knight, but it's like, as much as Knight was a pain for the media, he was also, if he liked you and wanted to give it to you, he was great for the media. He would give you endless sound bites, and that's what Cignetti does.
Yeah, and yet Cignetti is, when his players talk about him, I was listening to an interview with D'Angelo Pons where they asked him about Cignetti, and they said, Pons essentially was like, well, when he doesn't talk that much, but when he talks, it's impactful and it carries weight, and you listen and you respect him because he is a film junkie and he knows everything that he needs to know about whatever team he's playing. And Pons was even asked, like, is there a single moment that sticks out in terms of the Cignetti experience for you? And he couldn't come up with a single moment per se, but he said, because he started at JMU, he got recruited by Kurt Cignetti out of high school. And he said, I remember freshman year, Cignetti, who's obviously an offensive coach by trade, is really getting on him about fundamentals and being where you should be at the time that you should be there on the football field. And he said that was really what stuck with me, and that helped to drive me. I'm sure there are stories of Kurt Cignetti yelling at people or whatever in practice, but it feels like he's developed this odd persona where he comes across as brash and arrogant in these interviews, but really, and he even talked about this, I think, in the 60 Minutes interview. I've lost track. There's been so many Cignetti interviews now, but it's really about, he's very direct and he just says what he thinks. There's not a lot of, I think in the Aiden Fisher thing, when they were talking to his mom, she was talking about how there wasn't a lot of small talk when Cignetti came to recruit them. And I do think that combined with his wit and his ability to fire off one-liners, it's compelling in a way that many coaches in college football simply aren't. And you run down the list. I mean, we didn't even get to Brent Venables or James Franklin or a lot of these, Lincoln Riley. Like, there's just so many of these guys have smoothed off edges, and they don't come across as people who the casual fan would want to rally behind. And that has been as much the secret sauce with Curt Cignetti and the Indiana fan base as everything. A lot of Indiana fans are like, I recognize this, and I want this guy to lead us into where we're going. And that is a really cool element that to Wertheim's credit, he managed to bring out a little bit in that 60 Minutes piece.
Well, the thing, like, your point is so valid, and like there's been so many pieces of it, but like the thing that's amazing about Cignetti is he kind of always falls into this, like, you ask him, like, how are you doing this at Indiana? Like, the chip on the shoulder, and he never has an answer like, well, it's a good idea. Like, he immediately has like, well, John, it's process, it's procedure, it's preparation. Like, but it's not like he's doing a Tony Robbins thing where it's like, I'm using the same cliche every time, but it's like, he almost, and like, I remember at the end of the Big Ten title game, he's sitting on the dais with, Urban Meyer and that. And they're like, how's your defense so good? He's like, well, it's got to be in the right place, right? Like, he just starts. Yeah, it's like everything in his mind is like a Chat GPT bot of like, here are the 5 things that need to be the high level for this. And it's like, how do you remember? It's amazing how he's able to do it. And it's like, every time you ask him something, it's like, oh yeah, I know the plan for that. And it's not just replicating another plan to this one, or these are my 4 traits for life, and I'm going to impose everything on there. It's like, no, he's got like, here are the top 5 things you need to do for this. It's like, it's just every time it's something different, but it's like, you start listening, you're like, man, it's awesome. And I think I talked about it after the Big Ten title game. Like, that was the thing that was most impressive to me about all the media hits I've seen, is he's sitting there with it's like Matt Leinart and Urban Meyer and a couple like Mark Ingram.
It was a Fox crew. Yeah,
it's people who all know football and have done high level football things. And they asked him, and they're just like, they asked me, you can tell they're just like, I want to know your answer.
Yeah.
And then like, I remember they had like the defensive stat sheet, and he starts like just kind of talking. He starts like mentally like talking through what he's seeing. And they had a wide shot, and Urban Meyer is like, it's like watching Picasso or something. Well, like, I want to see how you're doing this.
From a functionality perspective, the fact that he defaults, and I remember the laughing by the rest of the panel from the Fox crew when he's going into his spiel. It's not a spiel.
Right.
It's and this is perhaps, if you're trying to unpack what makes Cignetti so effective at coaching, the fact that he defaults to saying those things, it's not an act, it's his way of thinking.
Right.
And it's like, this is actually the process is the results.
Yeah.
The process is what creates the results. And if you default back to what that process is, it sounds like coach speak, but it's not coach speak in the traditional sense of coach speak. It is the instruction manual.
Yeah.
And if he does that, and if that's his default, his players are being coached to think the same way. And again, how do you avoid the ups and downs and the emotional peaks and valleys that so many college football teams and college basketball teams fall into? Well, you do that by, as Cignetti says, you never get too high with success, you never get too low with failure, because ultimately it's not about the moment, it's about the process. And even though there's randomness in outcome and results in football, the process will win more times than it loses if you default back to it when you're thinking about why you're doing what you're doing. And that, the fact that he does that tells me that that's what Aiden Fisher's doing. It's what Carter Smith's doing. It's what Fernando Mendoza had to learn how to do. But then again, you think about, as Rhett and I talked about on the show yesterday, what Fernando looked like the first few games of the season versus what he started to look like by the time you get to the Illinois and Iowa games. You could see that transformation, and the players deserve individual credit, but the coaching and the way that the coaching approaches everything in this very rigid, organized system, and does so with a very level-headed approach. That is one of the secret elements that makes this Indiana team as good as they've been. And it's what, that's what they have to keep as they go into the playoff. But the fact that they were able to do that against Ohio State in a game where not everything went their way, where they made some mistakes, where they could have not performed in certain circumstances, but they were able to, that is ultimately what Indiana gets in Curt Cignetti and his staff. And that, I think, is really exciting if you're an Indiana fan, that's the scenario that you've got in front of you, that these are the people that are running the ship.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. 25-minute detour. All right. So now we know we're playing Alabama on the road.
In Alabama.
I know,
okay.
Totally me. Watching that Alabama-Oklahoma game was interesting for me. I sat down with my wife. We just watched the whole thing. I went through, and I'm assuming other IU fans went through this as well. I went through the first 20 minutes, the first half of the game being like, damn, I wish we could play Alabama. Like, it's just, Alabama looks like a hot mess. Like, I wish we could play them. And then by the end, I'm just like, damn, I wish we could have played Oklahoma. I mean, I think we will do okay against Alabama now that I know. I mean, I was like, I think we can beat either of these teams because they're both really good. They both have some flaws. But it was just a funny moment where, like, when Oklahoma was just rolling, I was like, man, it would have been nice to play Alabama, but I think we can do all right. I was a little nervous about, Mater and having a mobile quarterback, because I think something is kind of the one thing that Indiana has struggled with on defense is when you get a mobile quarterback. But yeah, it's like I went, I don't know if you were like that. Like, I kind of oscillated between wanting to play Alabama, and then when Alabama turned their jets on, be like, maybe I would have rather played Oklahoma.
Well, it's easy to be a prisoner of the moment,
yeah,
both ways. And I felt the same. It's like I was joking around. Wow, Alabama looks awful. They really didn't deserve to be in the playoff. And then second half rolls around, and it's like, oh, well. And so I took two things away from it. A, I'm not sure how high level either of those teams was in that game. And I think there were some flaws with both teams that we saw throughout the course of the season that were on full display for both of them. And you got to give Alabama credit because they've got the talent to be able to do what they did in the second half. And that was a good Oklahoma defense they were doing it against. But you also have to ding Alabama for how they played when they got down 17-0, and they were essentially a dropped pass away from being down 24-0. There's a lot about the game where it felt like it got away from Oklahoma as much as Alabama went out and won it.
Yeah.
But we default to looking at Alabama putting on that comeback and saying, wow, they outscored Oklahoma 31-7 after going down 17-0. They look like they've gotten back on track. Either way, whoever won this game, you would have preferred to play the team that lost, is how I've always said about this.
That's very fair.
And the idea that both teams were just going to look awful, sometimes that's not a great arbiter of things either. I mean, Texas A&M and Miami both looked real bad in the game they played against each other, but that doesn't mean that Ohio State is necessarily just going to run away with the game that they're going to play against Miami. Like, these are not transitive results. How a team plays in game A and how a team plays in game B might not be the same thing. So I choose to look at the Alabama result to say we knew Alabama was dangerous. We knew Alabama had a ton of talent, depending on how you want to calculate it. I mean, they've got the most 5 stars of any team on any roster that's in the playoff, and they have the second highest number of 4 and 5 stars combined. Georgia's got more 4 stars than Alabama does. This is a team that is really talented, and they have a really good coach. And Oklahoma would have been a better talent matchup for Indiana, but Indiana has beaten 2 teams that are more talented than Oklahoma and almost as talented as Alabama already this season, one on a neutral field and one on the road. So you have to not so much look at it from that perspective, I think, and I think you have to look at it from the perspective of we don't know what we're going to get out of Alabama in this game. Alabama is a team that has had some really high highs over the course of this season. They are a team that won at Georgia, and that is incredibly difficult to do. And you could make an argument that that is the best win in college football this year, better than winning at Oregon or better than Oklahoma winning at Alabama. They're a team that beat Tennessee by 17 points. They're a team that beat Vanderbilt by 16 points. But they're also a team that lost at home to Oklahoma, lost by 14 to Florida State, looked really bad in a 28-7 loss in the SEC title game to the Georgia team they beat earlier, a team that hasn't, prior to beating Oklahoma, hadn't scored 30 points since the middle of October. They've got the capacity to do anything they want to do on the field, but that's where Indiana comes in, because Indiana has just played consistently, according to the numbers, at a higher level than Alabama has throughout the course of the season. It kind of felt to me like you were going to have to go through Alabama as part of this quest that Indiana's on. You were going to have to play them at some point and beat them. If you're going to play a version of Alabama, I'd rather play this version of Alabama that's had some highs, but it also has also had some lows, rather than the Alabamas of 4 and 5 years ago that we got used to seeing, that once they got rolling were essentially unstoppable.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this. I think everything, you put everything in a good spot, but I look at how would that Alabama team have done in the Big Ten title game? Because that was a game, it felt like, sometimes you'll see these people make mods of Super Mario Brothers where it's like nothing but the fire ring going around, and you're like you just have to be locked in the entire time. You can't miss a jump or anything. Like, that's how that Indiana Ohio State game felt to me, where there were mistakes, missed field goals and a couple of bad plays, but neither team kind of stopped focusing for short periods of time at all. And Indiana missed the field goal. It's like, all right, we're locked back in. Like, we're still going to play defense. Like, there wasn't the moment that Alabama had where they just got down 17-0 and just looked like they were completely DOA. And that's where I look at this slightly differently as well. As like, I think Alabama has the highs of an Ohio State, of an Oregon, but what they don't have is that ability that Ohio State had, where they played at that high or that physicality or that 5-star level the entire game. And Indiana did too. And I think this is also, it's like Indiana is going to play in this game, and they are going to do some things to affect Alabama. Like, yes, the 5-star ranking isn't the same, but it's like Indiana's a hell of a team. I know you weren't saying they weren't, but it's like they're going to cause problems for Alabama as well. And Indiana has shown that they can make singular mistakes here and there, but unlike last year, they don't kind of let it compound or turn into a 2 or 3 drive issue, where Alabama does. And they have these moments where they'll just kind of go missing for 10 minutes. And I don't think you can do that against Indiana. And I think you saw that in the Big Ten title game. You had two teams that were just playing elite the entire time. And the score wasn't, 35-10, or 35-38 or something. But it's like, that was a high level game. So I'm nervous because it is Alabama, and they have a ton of talent, probably the most of anybody out there. And they have dudes like that catch that guy Mays. Like, they have dudes who can just go out and make plays. But I would say, like, so does Ohio State. And the thing is, if Alabama has any mental lapses or any times where they just kind of aren't figuring it out, I don't see Indiana matching it for 10 minutes like Oklahoma did. I see Indiana pouncing and just really tightening the noose and squeezing the life out of them.
It's possible. So there's a couple of things I think for IU fans to ponder over the course of this next 11 days as we get ready for this game. It's hard to believe it's 11 days away. That, first of all, feels too far in the future, and also
too soon.
It's coming. But look, you're going up against a really good quarterback in Ty Simpson. 3,500 yards passing so far this season. That includes the game against Oklahoma. 28 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions, a 64% completion rate, which that's not stellar, but that's, it's a decent amount. And a guy who has been very consistent when he's been at the top of his game. He had a rough patch against, Georgia, Auburn, didn't play particularly well against South Carolina. He's only had a couple of games where he's passed for over 300 yards this season, and he has had a couple of games where you just kind of scratched your head and it's like, what happened there? Including the SEC title game where he was only 19 for 39. The big problem that you run into when you're defending Alabama is they have this amazing stable of wide receivers to go along with this quarterback. And when he gets blocking and you give him time, like any other good quarterback, he will pick you apart. Germie Bernard, the senior wide receiver, 802 yards on 60 catches, 7 touchdowns this season. You've got Isaiah Horton, who's played very well. Lotsier Brooks, who's a freshman, 32 catches, 441 yards. They've had some weird things happen. I mean, Ryan Williams, who started off gangbusters, had 7 catches in that South Carolina game, only has, 10 catches total since then. It's like he's just disappeared off the map for Alabama, but they've had other people step up. Where Alabama struggles offensively is in the running game. They've been outrushed by their opponents by 150-plus yards so far this season. Jam Miller is their leading rusher, only 504 yards on 130 carries to this season. Daniel Hill, 271 yards. Like, their top 3 running backs, none of them are averaging 4 yards per carry. And as a team, they're only averaging 3.4 yards per carry. And they didn't rush the ball at all against Oklahoma. They had one big run for 30 yards and essentially did nothing else on the ground the entire rest of the game. So for Indiana, you've got an excellent secondary, a secondary that was able to combine with the defensive front to put pressure on Julian Sayin in the Ohio State game and tamp down a passing game with the most accurate quarterback in college football in Julian Sayin, and almost certainly the best wide receiver in the game in Jeremiah Smith. So Indiana has proven that they can play against a good passing attack. And the difference here is Ohio State has a running game to go with it. Not a great one, but a better one than what Alabama throws out there. I mean, as much as Ohio State's rushing attack has been criticized over the course of the season, Ohio State's rushed for 600 more yards than Alabama this year in one fewer game. And they're rushing for a 4.7 yards per carry average, which is almost a full yard and a third per carry more than Alabama's rushing so far this season. So Indiana was able to handle both of those things. Yes, you lose Stephen Daly. There's going to have to be some alterations to what you do in the front 7, but Indiana in this game, this seems to feed in their favor in that if they can create havoc, as they do every game against this Alabama offensive line, if they can pressure Ty Simpson, if they can confuse Ty Simpson with their coverage shells and give their front 6 or front 7, whatever they're doing in a given play, the chance to get home, they could make life very difficult on Alabama offensively. They're going to have to do that because you can't afford to let Alabama get rolling in a game like this offensively, especially in a game where Alabama's already played their first playoff. They've gotten loose. They've shaken off the loss in the SEC title game. They're going to come in with some confidence. You don't want to give them additional confidence as they get the game going.
Yep. No, agreed. It's also just taking a step back from the football, just the coaching stuff is wild. Like you're going to have a field day with the pregame where it's like DeBoer coached at IU. Both of the assistants, both were coaches at IU. And then you have, Cignetti basically had his entire assistant career at Alabama. Like, the connections are wild. And I think
he was only there for about 5 years. I mean, he was,
but was a high level assistant at Alabama. I mean, you have both of them were both coordinators at the other school. And then I think I heard this, so I think it's true. I mean, never played Alabama and Indiana, right? It's the first matchup ever.
First matchup, which is wild, but not
totally wild.
Well, both these programs have been around since.
Correct. In different areas of college football for most of the time.
Well, sure. But, I mean, Indiana's played a lot of teams that you would have thought at one point maybe Alabama and Indiana would have crossed paths. But it's cool that the sport is as old as it is.
Yeah, and you're having –
and these are 2 power conference teams who have been – I mean, Indiana has not been a major player in college football, but they've been in the Big Ten since 1900. Right. Alabama's been a major player since they won in the Rose Bowl 100 years ago. Like, that was really the – welcome to the party Alabama moment when they went out there and won the Rose Bowl in 1926. And the fact they've never played each other, I think, is cool. It's just an interesting thing to think about. Yeah, so look, there's a lot of those crossover moments, but I think lost in the brand ties, Cignetti having coached at Alabama, DeBoer and Kane Wommack having coached at Indiana, Nick Sheridan having coached at Indiana, David Ballou. I mean, there's all these different crossovers, but what will get lost in that is how good all of these guys are at their jobs.
Yes.
And we know Kalen DeBoer and what an outsized impact he made on Indiana's offense when he took over as OC for that 2019 season. And we know how much that ended up hurting when he left after 1 year to go coach at Fresno State.
And how good Wommack was as our
we know how good Kane Wommack was. That was the first really top-level defensive coordinator we'd seen at Indiana in a long time. And Bryant, I wouldn't trade Bryant Haines for anyone, but Kane Wommack is a really good defensive coordinator who's done some excellent things, first as a head coach at South Alabama and now the DC at Alabama. And look, Galen, DeBoer, and Kane Wommack they've dealt with a lot of pressure at Alabama, and they're still producing results. But Curt Cignetti and his crew, Cignetti learned so much from Saban about how to run a program and was clearly able to combine that with his own thoughts and reflections from all of his previous coaching staffs, whether that was at NC State or at other locations, and has managed to put all of that together in a way that has created something unique. And it makes for a really fun matchup. And Rhett was talking about this last night. The chess match between especially Mike Shanahan on offense and Kane Wommack on defense is going to be fascinating. I'm curious because this Alabama team, they're not as havoc driven as what you get out of Bryant Haines and Indiana's defense, but this is a team that's leading in turnover margin. They haven't been as good in turnover margin over the course of the second half of the season as they were in the first half. They actually had negative turnover margin in 3 out of their last 5 games. And, but they've been able to generate turnovers, somewhat consistency throughout the course of the season. They've been able to generate a lot of tackles for loss. I mean, Yanze Pierre, 13 tackles for loss. They've got another 3 guys with 6 tackles for loss. They've not generated an inordinate number of sacks, but they have been able to do what they need to do to slow down opposing offenses. And watching what Shanahan does with his offense, which is a very complete offense compared to what a lot of Alabama's faced so far, against an Alabama defense that will have some physical advantages. I'm really curious to see who ends up getting the better of that battle. Shanahan has a lot of weapons at his disposal, and he's got a quarterback that's unlikely to make as many mistakes as John Mateer made or some of the other quarterbacks that we saw in the SEC this year. But you're going to get a top-level defensive performance out of whatever Kane Wommack is bringing to the table with Alabama. And for Indiana, as much as I think we'll get caught up in talking about how does Indiana's defense match up against Alabama's offense, the game might be won or lost on the other side. How consistently can Indiana move the ball against an Alabama defense that is good, but maybe not as good statistically as Indiana's offense has been?
Yeah, no, that's just I was getting into that defense offense fallacy, just looking at interceptions that Ty Simpson has thrown this year. It's only thrown 5 because it feels like that's something where Indiana has struggled. It's where Mendoza has had a couple of interceptions or pick sixes at tough times, but in games like Ohio State, we're able to get the ball back. So can we do that? No, it's going to be a very interesting game. But I like our defensive chances just on the fact that Alabama feels a little more one-sided. So it's like we could scheme a little bit more for dealing with those elite wide receivers while not having to worry as much about the run as you did against Ohio State. So it's kind of like use that same Ohio State blueprint and just tweak it for a little less concern about the run being there.
There was a comment from Greg Lamont that we got on Twitter. Is it just me, or can no one run the ball with conviction outside of the Big Ten? It is curious because
we can raise your hand if you're getting 4 yards of carry, because Indiana is.
It's and Oregon, they throw the ball a lot more, but they certainly have no problem running the ball. But it was curious watching Oklahoma and Alabama and Texas A&M to a lesser extent struggle.
And Miami for a bit too.
Right. And I don't know if it's a lack of confidence. I think what it is just a lack of consistency along these offensive lines. And it does bring some interesting questions up about Alabama. Their left tackle's been out. Will he be able to come back? And even if he is able to come back, how much can Alabama actually do when they're running the football? If you look at the season for Alabama offensively, they've had one game against, well, actually, no. As I look back on it, I'm going to eliminate that game entirely. They had 269 yards rushing against Eastern Illinois. They had 212 yards running the game against Louisiana Monroe. You take those games out, they've had one game where they exceeded 125 rushing yards, and it was against Vanderbilt. They had -3 yards rushing against Georgia. They had, so I'm sorry, I missed one. They ran the ball 158 yards against Auburn. That was the other one that I missed. But 28 yards rushing against Oklahoma.
They have 7 games this year if you count the Oklahoma game where they've rushed under 100 yards for the game.
And the tendency amongst neutrals or SEC fans will be to assume that Alabama's already faced all of the best defenses that they will have faced this year because they played LSU. They played Oklahoma twice. They played in the SEC. And of course, that's where the best defensive fronts are, Scott.
So I've been told.
But what will be, I'm curious. I think we know the answer to this.
They rushed 72 yards against Wisconsin.
Yeah, I'm curious how well Indiana's defense carries against teams from other conferences. This is one of the problems with using the regular season as an arbiter. We've been watching Big Ten play all season. We've been watching Indiana play against Oregon, against Illinois, against Ohio State, all these top teams, and they've been able to hold their own, and more so defensively and defending the run. And you look down the string here of the games that Indiana's played, they have allowed triple digits in running twice all season. Once was against Old Dominion, which looks like the flukiest of fluke games. They allowed 218 yards rushing, and that was essentially on two plays.
Yeah.
And then they allowed 117 yards rushing on 33 carries against Penn State. And that was admittedly a game where Indiana's defensive front looked gassed once the game got going. But you look at the other performances they've turned in. They allowed 2 rushing yards to Illinois, 92 against Iowa, and that's Iowa's bread and butter. Iowa's got 4 out of the 5 PFF first-team offensive linemen in the country. 81 against Oregon, 74 against Michigan State, 88 against UCLA, 70 against Wisconsin, 44 against Purdue, 58 against Ohio State. They're allowing on the ground
2 against Illinois.
I said that one already.
Sorry.
But they're allowing 2.89 yards per carry against, and that's after giving up 9.5 yards per carry against Old Dominion to start the season. So this Indiana defensive
they've given up 3 rushing touchdowns all season in the Big Ten.
Yes.
Like take out the 2 Old Dominion, they give up 5 all year.
Yes.
But 1 against Iowa, 2 against Penn State. That's it.
Yeah. So
in the Big Ten.
The thing I'll advise IU fans on as you go through this next 11 days, you're going to get a lot of Alabama fans in your mentions. You're going to get a lot of people saying, well, Indiana hasn't played anybody, as if we haven't heard that one before. You're going to get a lot of people.
2024, Galen.
You're going to get a lot of people devaluing or attempting to devalue what Indiana has accomplished so far on the season in terms especially of their defensive performance. And you're going to hear a lot of arguments that somehow what Indiana's done hasn't been against teams that matter, hasn't been against good enough talent. This is the most interesting thing to me in terms of the national narrative for Indiana is how well can they perform? Can they plug up Alabama offensively? And then can they score steadily enough where they demonstrate the on paper superiority that both S&P Plus and FPI would indicate that Indiana's got in terms of the performances throughout the course of the season? We don't need to be convinced of this.
Right.
I'm just saying that will be the meta narrative that occurs over the course of this entire next 11 days in the buildup. And there's nothing that anybody is going to be able to say on the Indiana side to convince anybody that is predisposed to thinking that the Big Ten is a weaker conference from a talent perspective. It'll only be settled on the field. You're not going to convince anybody, except for the people that really pay attention to football, of what Indiana's done up to this point.
That's what's so cool about this matchup that I really do like is, I mean, Oklahoma, I'll play anybody in the Rose Bowl anytime. I'll go to that IU game at the Rose Bowl anytime.
That's big of you, Scott.
Yeah, I'll do it. But, to have this, you have the Ohio State game, like I've said multiple times, like that was the big bad of the Big Ten. Like that is the ultimate boss. Watching them do the Ohio and dot the I, that's a real thing. I mean, you can't get any more big boss in college football than Alabama. I mean, they've been the top dog for the last 20 years or 15 years since Saban was there. And this is really going to be a test, but it's also just a narrative test because of everything you said. Like until we had beat Ohio State, it was kind of like, all right, that's nice. Oregon's a tough place to play. but it's not Ohio State. Like you always kind of felt that. Even as a fan, I kind of had that in the back of my mind. Like those all things are in one category, and then there's like Ohio State is kind of just in a separate category of teams to beat. Whether or not they are the best Alabama team in the last 15 years, they're probably not, but they're still Alabama, and they still have all of that. And so this is also going to be a cool part of this ride, that if you go Big Ten title game for Ohio State straight into the Rose Bowl against Alabama, you're able to get through that gauntlet. You're one step closer to a title, kind of a no S moment, but it's also just a very cool, like you're beating the big bad for the entire national football at the biggest bowl game. It's a very cool symmetry piece. But I'm with you. Like you're not going to convince anybody who watches ESPN that Indiana has. You already see it being devalued. It's like, all right, well, Ohio State's not that good. You're already seeing, finals of Alabama and Georgia, and like I think that's who's going to win. It's like, how do we get two SEC schools there? And who cares? Like in the end, right. Who cares if you don't worry about the mentions? Don't worry about don't need to convince anybody. Like what you need to do is just go have fun and watch Indiana win the Rose Bowl in 11 days. But it's very cool that you have these back to back. And if this is part of our national championship journey, what a scalp to have on your mantle of like, hey, we're at the Rose Bowl and we beat Alabama at the Rose Bowl on our way to a title.
I wanted to follow up on the stat I was trying to calculate earlier. Never do this stuff in your head. But if you take the Old Dominion game out, Indiana's rush defense has allowed 791 yards on 326 carries. That's a 2.4 yards per carry average. And of the 5 touchdowns on the ground that Indiana has allowed throughout the course of this season, 2 of them came in that game. So they've allowed 2.4 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns total. I would assume that Indiana is going to be able to control Alabama's running game, because that's essentially been what's happened with a lot of these games that Alabama's been in. And then does that give Indiana the platform to figure out how to effectively pressure Ty Simpson and stifle Alabama's passing game? And then on the other side of it, how well does Indiana get their offense up and running? The one thing I think that I keep coming back to that concerns me a little bit about Indiana's offense is when they've played really imposing physical teams, they have struggled a bit to score with the same level of effectiveness that they've scored against the teams that don't have that. So right. You only score 13 points in the Ohio State game. You only scored 27 against Penn State. And that was a game that Indiana was clearly struggling to block in. You only scored 20 against Iowa. You did score 30 on the road at Oregon, and that has been the magnum opus so far of Indiana's season across the board in terms of how they played that game and how it was coached. And obviously Illinois, who, while they have some guys, they didn't have the right guys. It was a bad matchup for Illinois, but they scored 63. That's the outlier right now. I'm a little more concerned about, can Indiana consistently move the ball down the field? You knew that Ohio State was going to be a real challenge from that perspective. Alabama's defense, according to the numbers, is not nearly as good as Ohio State's defense. As Ohio State second in the country, according to FPI, efficiencies in defense. And Alabama is 9th, but they're like a full 10 points behind Ohio State's. Alabama's defense right now, if you look at the teams ranked around them, it's about the same as Iowa, who did give Indiana some problems. So this is where this is probably going to be a closer game than the 7-point spread. It's a game that I wouldn't be shocked to see Alabama cover in, but it's a game where Indiana, they need to be able to do enough offensively to where they're giving their defense cushion, so that if Alabama does break a couple of deep balls, which has been a possibility, we've seen it happen a couple of times this season for opponents. Illinois did it. Oregon did it. Indiana just has to play a game where they aren't struggling in any one area, where they're getting consistent performance across the board. And there was a really good piece of commentary I saw from one of the PFF guys where he was talking about, what's the deciding factor for Indiana, not just in this game, but in the playoff. And his point, which I think is a valid one, is, has Indiana already played their best ball, or do they have more? Do they have another level that they can go up? And that's the thing about the playoff. All 4 of these matchups that you've got remaining, whether you go by FPI or whether you go by S&P Plus, you've got 8 teams that are all within either the top 12 or top 13 of college football. This is the best versus the best. Like, as much as people want to complain about what happened in some of the games in the first round, all of these teams have a legitimate argument to be in this quarterfinal round. And so if you're Indiana, as much as you've beaten Oregon, you've beaten Ohio State, you've beaten Illinois, you have to have another 5 to 10%, if not more, of additional performance, additional efficiency, additional rooting out of mistakes. That's the level you have to elevate yourself to, because that's what you're going to get out of your opponent, whether it's Alabama or whoever else you're playing in the playoff.
Yep. No, completely agree. I look at it as, it has felt like in a couple of these games since Oregon, it's taken our offense some time to kind of get their footing and kind of understand what they want to do or how they're going to do it or what they're going to do to be effective. And that's my concern against a team like Alabama. Is it was similar to this concern to Ohio State. It's like you make one mistake and a guy can burn you. Like that. The Alabama has that talent where one missed coverage, you're probably not going to catch them, and that's going to be a touchdown. And so if your offense is taking a little bit more time to figure out like what's unlocking this key to get us going, you could be down 14-0 or 14-3 before you know it. The other thing with the Ohio State game that I'll throw out there,
before you get to that, there's actually a really interesting graph that I would like to pop up here. Let me just get it, because this kind of proves the point, and Taylor Lehman has talked about this as well as being an important factor and one that really helps to describe what's going on with Indiana, but informative when you look at it compared to Alabama. So what I'm showing you here, folks, and I know that it's tiny font, this is every team's expected point differential by quarter. Expected points, the way that you do advanced statistics in football is every play has an expected points added number that is attached to it based upon like how many yards did you gain and where did you get the ball to and what is that likely to add in terms of expected points. It's a good way of measuring more or less which teams are most efficient offensively and most teams are efficient defensively. So I'll go back and look at this chart. Indiana is the team in the top left of this chart. And for those who are not watching along, Indiana's got the highest EPA differential, and they are the kings of the third quarter, where their EPA differential is 158.2. That's an insane number. That is, I believe, the biggest number of any team in any quarter in college football this year. But if you look at Indiana's EPA differential for the first quarter, it's only 64.6. And you compare that to, say, Texas Tech or Notre Dame, who have EPA differentials of 117 and 115. You compare it to, like Michigan's got an EPA differential of 70. Tennessee's was 103. The reason why that's important is those are all teams that I just mentioned that have tended to get their work done early and then ratcheted down. Indiana has had great second quarters and insane third quarters. Now, then you look at Alabama. Alabama is further behind in this overall. Their EPA differential total is less than half of what Indiana's is on the season. And interestingly, they don't start particularly fast either. They generally have good second quarters. They are terrible in the third quarter. They have a negative EPA differential in the third quarter, and that is when Indiana tends to shine. It's an interesting contrast to what happened in the game against Oklahoma, because it was a game where Alabama clearly made adjustments and managed to leverage that third quarter into what gave them the victory. But it goes back to what we were just talking about in terms of Indiana needing to get off to faster starts than they have generally gotten off to. You just don't want to give the opposition the feeling like they're going to have a chance in a game, because as much as Indiana has crushed the souls of so many teams that they've played this year by that gradual accrual of scoring as it goes along, you're playing much better teams on average in this playoff than you've played throughout the course of the season. And you just don't want to let teams hang around and think, all right, we got second half, we're only down 3 or we're up 3 or up 7. We can win this game. You want to be able to get off to a good start and then sustain, not build up to something later, I think, to have the best chance of victory in any of the games that Indiana plays.
Going in tandem with that, just looking at the red zone scoring for Indiana this season, it's they're scoring 90% of the time they hit the red zone this season. On 65 attempts, they've scored 59 times. But you dig into those numbers, and again, this is where I think you need to be a little bit better than you've been in two different areas. If you look, Ohio State, obviously, they scored 25%. They got a touchdown 25% of the time they were in the red zone. They scored 75% of the time with touchdown and field goal. That number has to be better throughout the playoff. It's one game, but it's just you have to be better than 25% of getting a touchdown in the red zone. Against Oregon, they got a touchdown 60% of the time they were in the red zone. Against Iowa, it was 100%. Only one like that. Also, Iowa, you only had one red zone attempt. You need more than that. But against Oregon and Penn State, they had 5 red zone attempts. I've seen this right? 5 red zone attempts for each game. They scored 100% of the time, which is good. But both of those games, they were 60% of getting a touchdown in the red zone. That's about the clip you need to be. You need to be 60, 70% of getting touchdowns in the red zone. That 25% against Ohio State, you have to have that a little bit higher. It's funny. That Old Dominion game just continues to be a standout of an outlier. Right. Indiana was in the red zone 7 times that game, only scored 57% of the time, only got 28% touchdown. It's just like, it's such a bananas outlier. But outside of that, most games this year, they're getting a touchdown when they're in the red zone between 70 and 100% of the time. It's just, getting down to that 60% is kind of, to me, the minimum, threshold you have to be in the playoff to get there. That 25% they did against Ohio State, they were able to make a win of that game. But I think you're really flirting with danger if you're only scoring touchdowns 25% of the time. So I would say that's something when you get to the red zone, you gotta cash those in.
Yeah, there's a lot of intangibles that Indiana has done well since the Old Dominion game.
Yes,
that have contributed to not just the number of victories, but the margin of victories that have made Indiana so dominant statistically. And again, this has got to be a game like Oregon, like Illinois. It can't be a game like Iowa or like Penn State, where Indiana allowed the moment and the physicality of their opponent to put them into positions where they were making mistakes. And, whether it was in the Iowa game, the number of times that they couldn't protect Fernando Mendoza, it all culminated in that interception at the end that almost ended the game for Indiana. Their inability to run in key situations was a real problem. And then in the Penn State game, it was not too dissimilar, where they had them, they had almost pounced on them and crushed their souls at the end of the first half, but they didn't land the death blow at the beginning of the second half. They let Penn State stick around, and it took that miracle comeback on that last drive from Mendoza to yield the victory that they maybe didn't deserve per se in terms of the way that the full length of the game had gone. That's got to be what dominates Indiana's mentality. They've got to stay with that consistency. They can't let themselves get taken out of what they're doing. And they've got to look, I think, especially to me, Indiana's rushing attack is the single most important thing that will be a barometer of how well Indiana plays in this game. They've got to, if they can control clock and they can use the run to force single coverage against Elijah Surratt, against Charlie Becker, if they get Omar Cooper back full strength, which I'm assuming they will, even if then Alabama's really in trouble, because they've got to choose. Are you going to throw extra defenders at the receivers, all of whom have shown how dangerous they are at various points in the season? So then are you leaving the underneath open? So then Riley Nowakowski can feast, and then you also make it easier on Roman Hemby and Kalon Black to do what they need to do. And you've also got Fernando Mendoza's mobility. Like, there's just a lot of things. But to me, the running attack in this game is as important as the passing attack was in the Ohio State game. One has got to open things up for the other. And, paradoxically, I think Alabama, like, if you look at the games, there hasn't really been a clear indicator in terms of, statistically speaking, when they've lost, when things are going well or badly. That they didn't defend the run terribly against Georgia, but they allowed 141 yards. They did defend the run terribly against Florida State at the beginning of the year, but that also looks like as much of an outlier for Alabama as Old Dominion does for Indiana. I think we can finally stop talking about that game.
Yep.
So anyway, we'll have more to talk about throughout the course of this upcoming 11 days. But that's essentially a high-level overview for what Indiana will be facing in this game. And I'm endlessly curious to see what it looks like in the stands. We had some questions about what we thought the crowd split was going to look like.
Everybody I know is going to the game.
I know.
It's so I mean, but I felt similarly with the Big Ten title game, although I think we outdrew Ohio State. Again, we're not going to have the cool color combo like Ohio State had the same thing, red and red. We're going to have the same. We knew no matter what, who we were playing, Oklahoma or Alabama, we're going to get red and red. It would have been nice to have you're playing, BYU or something. You just have a completely different color. But so I think even at the game, it's going to be tough to tell the fan breakout. But it feels like at worst it's 50-50.
Yeah, I think it'll be more than that. I mean, I think Alabama fans will show up. It's a big stadium. Yes, 91,000 seats, but it does feel like a lot of Indiana people are going, and it will. I have no idea how Alabama fans will travel for this one. It'll probably be a good showing. I think it'll be probably somewhere in the 60-40 to 50-50, somewhere in that range, but the energy is going to be interesting. And I think Indiana, we saw in a relatively meaningless to the average person conference game last year, how enthusiastic and how much energy Indiana fans brought to that UCLA game in the Rose Bowl. This is like another order above and beyond that, if you can get IU fans out there, since the travel's a bit difficult, to say the least, from a price perspective. But that's going to be the one of the many factors that goes into this game, and it looks like, at least from early reports, the weather should cooperate. It'll be, I think, mid-60s and a very classic Southern California type of day. That, I think, will help Indiana. You don't want to play in bad weather conditions, and
right.
You generally don't get those in the Rose Bowl, despite it being an outdoor venue.
Yep.
So,
can I take a step back and do one college football playoff thought?
Go ahead.
I know you probably hit this in football weather or with Rhett. I've not listened to those. That's my pre-Christmas gift to myself when we're driving to Fort Wayne for Christmas Eve. That'll be what we listen to. The families. Well, we'll probably do Christmas music. It's just I want to say this. College football is a big multi-billion-dollar business. It's just absurd that you had two games yesterday that were just completely non-competitive. Everybody could see that coming up, and I understand it's the way they set things up with you. You're going to have these conference champions and that, but you got to course correct. My thing is when a movie comes out, they test screen it. It's like they will make changes to a movie before they put it out there. This is an entertainment business. It's $1 billion business to just have two of your marquee games be 40-point plus blowouts, which, I mean, the spreads, the spreads ahead of time were 20 points there. If Apple comes out with a phone where the button's on the wrong side, they will change it. They're not just like, well, we'll wait till next year and have our committee decide where to put the button next year. I mean, these are big money, big TV slots to just, I think it's just absolutely stupid. And I think at some point over the last couple of months, you should have just been like, hey, we're just going to enact a rule right now that you have to be in the top 16 to be one of these slots. It's like, sorry, JMU, sorry, Tulane. To just be like, well, what are we going to do? We can't change the rules midstream, for smaller conferences. Like, you're not going to do it to a Big Ten or an SEC school. I just think what we're trying to do here, we're trying to create compelling TV windows. You're trying to crown a champion. I just thought it was utterly stupid. You could see it happening. And once it happened, it's like, all right, now we're just stuck with this. Like, this is, I don't know. I think it's insane that they did not make any changes afterwards. And I understand the argument of you made the rules, you got to stick with them, but I also don't agree with that.
I mean, James Madison scored 34 points at Oregon and only lost by 17. They certainly played for the full 60 minutes.
Yeah.
I guess you could make the argument on the Tulane front, but look, I disagree wholeheartedly with that. My feeling is, if you're just going to not allow anybody other than a pre-selected group of teams into the playoff, then you essentially do a lot of damage to what the regular season looks like across the board, and you essentially tell 2/3 of FBS, sorry, you don't get to participate in this. Look, when you get down to it, there have been a ton of blowouts in the college football playoff. Most of those blowouts have involved power conference teams. TCU in the championship game lost 65-7 to Georgia. Oregon beat Florida 59-20. Alabama beat Michigan State 38-0. LSU beat Oklahoma 63-28. Clemson beat Ohio State 31-0. These are all results from the last decade, essentially.
But I would say those games, the spread probably wasn't a 20-plus point spread going into it. Like, they were blowouts that retroact. Originally, you didn't think they were going to be blowouts.
But again, we're playing hypothetical games if we're just going by what the spread is. That we're whatever the spread was, people are complaining about the lack of competitiveness. Well, James Madison lost by fewer points to Oregon than Tennessee lost to Ohio State last year. They lost by fewer points than SMU lost to Penn State last year. And those are power conference teams. No one said, Tennessee didn't belong. They were like, well, that was a bad game. I don't think you need to have an existential crisis every time you have a blowout in a game. And look, blowouts happen in football. We see it all the time. How many, we actually did talk about this on Football Weather. How many blowouts have we seen in the NFL playoffs over the course of time? I remember, I think famously it was Dan Marino's last game. They got just obliterated by the Denver Broncos. They lost by like 45 or 50 points in that game. And we've seen that happen many times over the course of NFL playoff years. No one says, well, we need fewer teams or we need to change the rules midstream. I'm just not moved by the idea that we need to change things up so that unless Vegas thinks you're going to be competitive, you're not allowed to participate. I just think that it's unnecessary, first of all. And second of all, we assume so much in football, and Indiana fans of all fans should not be the ones advocating for more exclusivity in playoff games. Like the level of parity that we're starting to see, you could make an argument that the group of five schools may not be the place where the parity can exist, and that parity is only going down to maybe the top 30 teams in FBS. But a lot of the players that make up the rosters of the teams that are competing at this level are players that played at the group of five level. They're getting a lot of experience there. I don't think it's unreasonable to have a group of five team or two if the conditions warrant. You should have only had one, and one of the power conferences couldn't get their rules straight to figure out how to avoid having Duke with 5 losses be their champion. I mean, that to me is something that needs to get fixed first before we look at the overall playoff format and who's getting let in.
I'm with you on the ACC thing. And I would say I'm also I'm guilty of the James Madison thing where, it was 34-6. And I know they kept playing and they scored more and it was a 17-point game, but it's that game was over. I stopped watching.
Didn't we just complain about people saying that about Indiana versus Notre Dame last year?
It's fair, but it was never 34-6. Indiana was never down by 28 points.
27-3. That's not a lot. It's not a whole lot of difference there in the math.
That's fair, but don't use my own logic against me.
Sorry.
I hear you. I would disagree. I looked at it as I felt like you knew going in those were all going to be really, it's going to be really tough for Tulane and James Madison to compete. And for most of the time, it looked like that was the case. And I think that would be my counter is that, all the other blowouts you mentioned, whatever, it's Florida, going into those games, you weren't that's going to be a blowout. It could, any game could be a blowout. It could happen. I'm not saying I'm not bothered by the fact it's a blowout. I'm bothered by the fact that you went into it being I don't think this game's going to be competitive, and then it wasn't. And it's fine in the NCAA basketball tournament because you have lots of games. I just think when you only have 12 teams, you're already being exclusive. That's the whole point, is it's exclusive. I would say you either need to expand it to 60. And I don't want to keep expanding. I didn't like it. And I just didn't think it was a good look for college football yesterday to basically have 2 games that mattered and 2 games that most people were well, these aren't going to be competitive. Then you turn it on, it's 34-6. Okay, this is exactly what I expected.
Well, it's a question that I don't think we'll ever have a great resolution in terms of what's the right way of going about it. But again, I will go back to how football normally works. Because there are fewer games, you're not going to be guaranteed that all the games are going to be good. Yeah. And I don't have the same psychological response that you do or others do about, that game, I didn't think it was going to be competitive and it wasn't competitive. That sucked versus, I thought this game was going to be competitive and it was not competitive at all. And that one was okay. I don't get any more joy. Would it have been better if we watched Duke lose by 30 plus points to Ole Miss or Tulane? What's the difference there?
It's fair, but I think Duke also would have been a 20-point underdog. Like it would have been if my thing is like if it would have been I don't want to use no name. Like Texas, like let's just say Texas was playing at Oregon and Texas lost by 30, at least it'd been like, oh wow, like that's like maybe I can glean something from that. Like I would say, and we're now past the point, like I don't care enough about this as the amount that we're talking about it. But it's like I don't know if we glean much from like if Oregon had beaten Texas 54-31, you'd be like, man, Oregon, like they're turning it on. Like that's a good Texas team they beat. Or like I just don't know if you glean anything. It's like, all right, they beat James Madison. Like, great. Like what? Nothing has changed.
It's a game you have to win. And if you didn't get a bye, I mean, the idea that you have to have great matchups that are guaranteed competitive in every game, or that you have to have in your own mind what brands match up against which other brands, I just, to me, that doesn't happen in any sport. Like there's no setup where you're going to guarantee that all the games are good. And
it's not a good guarantee. It's not a good game guarantee. It's just I don't think Tulane and James Madison are like at the level of teams that are vying for a national championship.
I mean, Ohio State beat Oregon 31, or it was leading Oregon 31-0 last year in the second quarter. To me, football, this happens in football sometimes. It's part of the sport. And we're going to, you already said, well, nothing that happened after I decided the game was over between Oregon and James Madison mattered, even though it's a 60-minute game.
No, it's fair.
So I guess my question always comes back to, if you want to gatekeep based upon, I don't think these teams will be competitive and neither does Vegas, therefore they shouldn't even be allowed to participate. I just think that runs counter to everything that's become, if you're an Indiana fan in football and you've seen the competitive landscape flatten out, it lends itself to the idea, in my opinion, that the more teams that get at least an opportunity to go play at that level, even if they lose, eventually you will see a game where that team doesn't lose. It's like for years, Scott, we heard, why do we even play 1 versus 16 in the NCAA tournament? Why are those teams even allowed in? They don't have a shot in hell of ever beating one of those 1 seeds. And now we've had it happen twice in the last, 7 or 8 years. Now, does that mean that most of the 1/16 games are going to be competitive? No. But American sport and the narratives we love to get out of American sport always wants, I think, ideally to keep it open that the underdog, the significant underdog, has a shot in games like this. And what's, I think, the salvation for college football in an era where it has to generate more interest and more money and it has to organize itself better is not, we need to reorganize and change the rules because we're afraid this might not be a competitive game, when it very well might have been a competitive game. To me, it creates a scenario where when you predetermine outcomes to the degree that college football has liked to do historically, you take away some of the potential magic that you can get out of those circumstances. And that, to me, has got to be what you put into this new era of college football, not to go back to the way that it used to be, where we would make it so difficult to compete that it essentially predetermined so much about what we thought of the sport.
Yeah, no, I hear everything you're saying. For such a small number of teams, and the basketball tournament is just different. You have so many teams; those are conference champions that are getting those 15, 16 seeds, and it's just a lot of teams getting in there. And there's a lot of spaces. I think maybe you limit it to one spotter, but it's like, again, it's not so much they predetermine they have a chance. It's like, is Tulane even ranked in the top 20?
And ranked in the top 20 in terms of what?
Well,
I will say this. Tulane was the team that I had the problem with being included because of the fact that when you look at how they lined up statistically, they were behind some other teams that in the group of 5 that probably had a better argument. And look, South Florida, according to the numbers, was a top 20 team. If you look at FPI efficiencies, they were right up there. They were, if you take just the straight up FPI, they were 23rd. North Texas was a pretty highly rated team. James Madison was a top 30 team. Like, these are not teams that were this was not the hunt. These were more competitive teams than your average 12 or 13 seed is in college basketball. I just think again, if the idea is, well, they were never going to be competitive in the first place, and you just want to ignore the second half of JMU Oregon because you say it doesn't matter, because at that point that using you as the
avatar
for everybody else, well, that's a kind of a crappy way to watch football, in my opinion. But that's been the historical way that we've looked at football, and college football in particular. I'm just not sure if it's good for the sport to go into it and say, sorry, group of five, we're never even going to give you the opportunity to compete. We're just going to relegate you to this thing because in our minds, you'll never be on the same level as everybody else. I just think that's a very slippery slope in thinking that leads to an environment that college football can't afford to sustain anymore. Like, they need to be more open and give more teams shots, not fewer, because that's how you grow the sport nationwide.
That's a fair point. I agree with you on that. I would just say, like, then make it like 16 teams, keeps the same amount of time. You're not adding another round.
I'm all for adding more. I mean, I talked about this on one of the podcasts earlier. I think, as we said on Football Weather, the problem right now is people want to point to the regular season and say that needs to determine who earns a spot in the playoff. And the regular season is not very representative because it's so dependent on what your conference schedule was and who you avoided playing in the regular season. This was the debate about Texas A&M. Texas A&M, if you really look at their schedule, didn't beat anybody except for Notre Dame early on in the season. And their SEC schedule, they avoided most of the big teams. And then when they, yes, they beat Oklahoma, good for them, with an injured John Mateer, and then they lost to Texas. Like, there's just so many things about the regular season that don't give you a full picture of how good all these teams are. I think you do need more teams in the playoff, but I think you can do that without simultaneously telling the group of five teams, sorry, you can no longer compete. I didn't think that Boise State deserved a bye last year. That was part of the problem. But I also think that, again, like the fact that Boise State had a bye last year is because the ACC champ and the Big 12 champ were both not good enough to rank above Boise State in the ranking system that everybody agreed.
I know this is really the ACC's fault. No, year over year, it's like the ACC just can't get it together.
But it's how we think about power structure in college football that's a problem. And again, if you use the idea that conferences matter, which you should, and if you use the idea that the way that you evaluate teams matters, if you're going to use both quantitative criteria and qualitative criteria, like the College Football Playoff Committee does, I don't think you can go through the whole season with a system that everybody agreed to before the year started and then change it halfway through because you don't like what the potential results would be. But I also think that changing it to exclude the possibility that you might have, remember, Cincinnati made the college football playoff as a seeded team in the 4-team era.
Yeah.
Like, that was a really good Cincinnati team. What you're talking about now, yes, Cincinnati's in the Big 12, but a team like that wouldn't even have the opportunity to compete if you change it to where you don't have group of 5 teams able to participate. And I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I've seen a lot of people saying that if you're in the group of 5, soon to be group of 6, you just shouldn't have the opportunity because how could you be competitive? And you don't know that on a year-to-year basis.
No, I agree. I just don't think 2 of the 10 spots, like 2 and then 10,
like again, that was the
11,
ACC's
like make
fault.
it 16. I agree. It's the ACC's fault, and it's going to be 2 of 9 spots moving forward because what Notre Dame has basically a guaranteed spot the next 3 years. Like that, that's also insane.
Unless they expand to 16, and then I think that MOU is off the table. But anyway,
okay, yeah. Or you look at their schedule, like Notre Dame's playing like 1 loss and they're out. But anyway,
that's part of the problem. Notre Dame, if they'd made it, would have made it this year, despite really having beaten nobody of playoff quality. Right. You want to argue USC, I guess, maybe. And next year they'll have what looks like on paper an even easier schedule to do that with. I don't really want to reward that. I'd rather reward a team that went 12-1 and won their conference and give them a shot. The regular season matters unless it hurts a team with a big brand, and then suddenly it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, all those Notre Dame fans last night talking, or yesterday during the day, being like, well, Notre Dame would have beaten either Miami or Texas A&M. And it's like, you lost to both of them.
Right.
You lost to both of them.
This year.
Right. So the argument about the quality of the group of 5 teams, again, is a year-by-year thing. You don't know when everything coalesces. And again, I'll use Indiana as an example. No one thought Indiana would be good enough to be a playoff team last year, and very few people thought Indiana was going to be good enough to be a playoff team this year, let alone the number 1 overall team. There's so many things that we are told that we know about college football by people whose job it is to watch college football. But the more I see what those people say, the more I wonder if they're actually watching college football to learn, or whether they're simply watching it to try to find things that confirm their own pre-existing biases. And if it's the latter, and I think it really is in a lot of these people's cases, that's not the intellectual spot I want to start from when trying to figure out who gets a shot at the end of the season to play for a national title.
I'll end on this, and we'll have this figured out in 30 days when we win the national championship, and we can just say that. But the only thing that bugged me with the 60, going back to the beginning, that bugged me with the 60 minutes piece, you mentioned, just said this, like, we got the number 1 seed. I keep hearing, like, Indiana, the number 1 seed in the tournament. Like, we're the number 1 team in the country. Right. But it just, number 1 seed makes it sound like, again, like, I mean, it was picked by a committee. It's all that. Like, it was picked because we're the only undefeated team. Like, we played the whole season. As it stands right now, we are the best team in the country, the number 1 team in the country. To me, that sounds better than the number 1 seed. I just, that rubs me. But again, it won't matter in 30 days or whatever when we can say, well, we're also the undefeated national champions of college football. And that starts with us beating Alabama on January 1st. And we're going to do it with procedure, process. I'm sound like Signetti. January 1st in the Rose Bowl against Alabama. Let's go.
Lot to come here, including the holidays. And then on the other side of it, we will, of course, be in Pasadena watching Indiana take on Alabama. So plenty more on the Back Home Network. Hopefully you enjoyed this show. Check out all the other shows on the Back Home Network. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is Crimson Cast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.